Well, maybe we'll start at the beginning.
Sure.
So maybe tell us who you are.
Who I am. My name's Jess Tallman. I'm from Toronto. I'm 29. I mostly do photo-based sculpture, and I shoot on film, and I scan and I edit and I print my work in my studio. My practice is pretty studio-based, so I go out into the world, I shoot images with my camera, I look and I experience, and then I bring those images back to the studio space. And then I work with them. So printing, looking, thinking, cutting, folding, doing it all over again, which eventually ends up into a single final thing. But it takes a long time for a work to kind of start from like when I hit the shutter to like that piece. So, which isn't even the final piece, that's just a mock, like a maquette of what it'll look like when it's finished. Sorry, I have to sneeze.
Bless you.
Okay, I think that's it.
That was great.
That's good? Okay. Cool.
So, yeah, it seems like there's a pretty intensive kind of process as to what happens, and like editing kind of comes to mind, and all of that kind of stuff. And so, when you take photographs, is that on film exclusively, or do you work with digital at all?
I do take digital photographs, but Alan, do you see that black thing that's right next to you?
Yep.
Can you pass me that? So this is like my contact sheets of negatives that I keep. So like everything I shoot, I have a contact sheet, and then these are the negatives that go with them.
Amazing.
So, and this is just a record of everything I've shot over years and years and years. I label everything. But yeah, film, like shooting on film, this is 35 millimeter, is like a big part of my practice because I like the way the grain feels and looks. It looks really different than a digital camera. I like that I only have 36 exposures or 24 exposures in a roll. I like loading the film. I like shooting in black and white, because when you shoot digital, like the image is just color, and then you have to process it to be black and white. But there's something about experiencing the world without color that has a really powerful impression on you. So, yep, everything is shot on film except the photographs that I use archival material. So like things that I don't shoot. So that's also part of my practice. So all those images, top row and second row, are images that I kind of researched and scoured for a project that I was doing for Honest Eds and for the Mirvish Village. So it's closing, or it's closed already, and it's
demolished.
And so that project was a celebration of its history and its like architectural legacy. So I started from like the early 20s and 30s all the way, like all the renovations like in the 60s, 70s, and up until like 2000s of Honest Eds, and then also the Mirvish Village, how it changed, and kind of like cutting and folding those images into like a long sequence.
Right.
So yeah.
And so, as far as you're looking at images of Toronto in this project, is this something that's significant in other projects that you're working on, or aspects of your work?
Yeah. So a definite theme or like ideas that I work with in my practice is like time, history, the city or urban like landscapes, and you can see that like through all my work. Like I don't have any people. There's no figure.
Right.
It's like the human aspect is like totally not present. So I'm really interested in cities, how cities are formed, how cities change, the good and the bad of that. And yeah, and kind of all of my work, I feel like the buildings are a stand-in for the human experience, because they've experienced a lot over time. Like that city hall, building.
Right.
This is U of T Medical Sciences building.
Oh yeah.
Same with this one. And it's interesting, like even that particular building was pretty celebrated when it first opened in the 60s. The facade of it, which you can kind of see, is like this beautiful, like not cast in place, but precast kind of sculptures that ornament the entire side of it. And now, I mean, like they probably celebrated sculptor, which made a collaboration with the architect. But when people look at the building now, it's like so overlooked and so ugly.
Right.
And even like some of the medical sciences students that I've met who work in that and like study in that building, they hate it.
Right.
They find it so oppressive and like the ugliest thing. There's no light, so there's like.
And it's like ideas change too about the aesthetics of something, and it eventually just ends up looking outdated, right? And then there's this kind of like, nope, I don't like it. It's not. It's time to move on to something new, right?
Yeah. No.
So so as far as your practice goes, like you're doing all this manipulating to all these images. Is that a way? Like how does that relate to this like changing idea about a building or an image or things like that?
That's a great question. Yeah, like taste change. So that's what was like very, very trendy like 40, 50 years ago. Now, you're right, it looks super outdated. But when I'm thinking about, or when you're asking about the manipulations, to me it comes down to taking ownership of these buildings. Like they can seem really cold and really monolithic and like they shouldn't be part of our lives when I think they actually should. Like they're super like socialist, like they're so communist. There's like such a history of brutalism with Soviet Russia and like how democratic it is. It's made with concrete, which is a universal material. It's very cheap. You know, this is not a type of building that is built for rich people. This is the type of building that's built for the everyday, for
the people.
Exactly. And so, but a lot of that's lost. And so I think with my manipulations, both practical and digital, that I'm making them organic, or making them malleable, or making them more relatable. Because I do find there is a beauty in them. They're both ugly and horrible, and beautiful and symmetrical and elegant in so many different ways, and not a lot of people can see that. And it's like they're hopeful. They like look to the future.
Right.
But they look to a future that doesn't exist or didn't happen. So there's like this really like bittersweet sadness to these buildings that I really love, especially when you see them falling apart, or you see them being destroyed, or you see, you know, glass facades going up around them, you know, which is really, I have mixed feelings, especially when like Robarts, which is the U of T library building, which is like a concrete peacock, just celebrated and ugly, but like there's a glass facade that's being put on top of it, which is going to be proposed and going to happen in the next like 7 years. And I have very mixed feelings. Like I think it's great to enhance and bring a building into the present, but I also like that thing is a work of art. Like the coffered ceilings, like the elevators, like everything about that building is beautiful and used every day. So yeah, the manipulations are for me to take control of it, but also to kind of like illustrate how a photograph doesn't tell the truth.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking about even when you're looking at a building and you don't know its history, it has a very different meaning to you, right? And that history isn't always obvious when you're just looking at an image or looking at a building or an object or anything else. It just has a completely different thing.
Yeah.
So by manipulating and interacting with an image of it, it's kind of a way of having a little bit of a say about
totally
what comes out of that.
Yeah, and like photographs, like people don't necessarily like they think they're truth. and like
Exactly,
that
yeah.
they're a document of reality. But
Document, yes.
but they're not like photographers frame, so you leave things out of the frame, you change the depth of field, you choose what's in focus. Like photographers are liars just as much as they are truth tellers. And I think what I'm maybe depicting in the work is like the failing of photography, but in its like beauty and tragedy, like that.
I feel like you're celebrating it a little bit too.
Yeah?
Like not
Okay.
not in a negative way, but yeah, it's just this reminder of the context that something is in.
Totally.
So kind of this interest in cities and in history and all of that. Can you sort of trace where that comes from?
Yes. So my work deals with, it's actually pretty funny, like for my work not even 5 years ago to what it is now, looks very, very different. I actually have two, like I just unwrapped 2 old pieces. I was like packing up my studio, and I can show you them. Hold on. So here's one. If you want to come over.
Wow.
Here's another. So,
Yeah, it is very obvious that there was a departure or an evolution.
totally.
Right.
So my work, like this work has been about my grandparents, but about inherited trauma and ideas of memory passed on through the generations. So my grandparents are Holocaust survivors. And so like this project started when my grandmother had advanced Alzheimer's, and using photographs to go into the past and remind her of who she was. And so like all the pictures that you see that I'm projecting onto them are images of the past right after the war ended, when they were in Germany. And so there's not a lot left. And I would photograph other Polish survivors. They were from Poland. And so my work, so I give you this context because I do want to answer your question. The work is about family trauma.
Right.
And that may not be apparent in the current work, but it is also about that.
Well, I think maybe that's the appreciation of history is what happens kind of in the later series.
Yeah.
That still has its roots in what you're doing here as well.
Yeah.
That makes sense to me.
And I think like what is continuing from this work to the other work is that I'm interrupting the photograph. Here, I'm interrupting it with light. So using projections like harsh shadows or like double exposures to kind of like play with your understanding of space. And I think I'm doing the same thing in the rest of the work, and I do that with color. I think my just strategies have changed. So I mix black and white with color. The colors are interruptions, but also like the paper. And so like even here I was interrupted in like messing with your sense of like depth and space and what is real and what's a shadow. So yeah, I think there's a lot of like things that are threads that are being pulled as I'm continuing to work, but the stuff was made in 2010. This was made in 2010 or 2011, and then this work was made 2016. So in like less than like 5 years, and that really changed when I was in grad school.
Okay.
Yeah. It's pretty funny. I was showing this work in my first year of grad school, and here I can go back into the frame. So I was showing this work in my first, for one of the first studio visits I had in grad school, and it was with an alumni of my MFA program, and he was making very different work than me, but that's okay. But essentially I had a really bad studio visit with him, and it was really good because he looked at the work and he said, I can't relate to any of this work because I'm not Jewish. And I just got so angry at him because I was like, you don't need to be a Jew to understand, just because of the cultural context I'm working with.
Right.
is the Holocaust doesn't mean that like any person who's experienced pain or sorrow or, you know, displacement, you don't have to be a Jewish person, but everyone can understand that. Mm-hmm. And I just got so angry and I was like, you know what, I'm not going to make the Jewish work anymore. I'm going to make the same kind of work, but take out all of that context that some people seem to be having trouble with. Right. And that's sort of what I did. Mm-hmm. And I've kind of emptied out my photographs of people. But in some ways, the history and the time and the emotion hopefully is still there. So that's a long-winded story of like where my work started and how it's changed and why. And I localized that change from that studio visit. Right. Very actively so, which was interesting.
And so what kind of impact did that have? Like once you started kind of thinking about things in a different way and making slightly different work, like what was the impact on you personally and kind of what the work started to say in a
I started from scratch. So I was like, okay, you know what? I'm not going to make this anymore. I'm going to think about the same ideas but use different visuals to express it. And so I just made a lot of experiments. So I started printing different kinds of images, buildings. So I kind of returned to obsession, brutalist architecture. I was living in New York at the time, so I was really missing Toronto. And so I just started, like, I printed on this kind of like, this is a good example of this like luster paper. I don't know if you want to feel it. This like luster paper, which is like really different than what I use now. But it started cracking, and that's when I started doing my first folds. And it was really rudimentary at first, and then I slowly evolved it to something that looks like this. Oh, wow. Yeah. So like it took me a while. It took me like 6 months to figure out the right kind of like, it's called a triangle tessellation fold. So if you can see it, like there's a grid of triangles that are all the same. And then I realized like if I can scrunch it, I can fold something and make it look organic or make it look like moss within it. And I can create these really cool architectural shapes out of a piece of paper. Right. And it was really incredible to turn something flat into something that was like had dimension. So that was like a pretty, especially coming from like a photography background, right? Like that surface is so important. In photography, right. For sure. And that like totally changed my practice. Yeah. And I've been in increments trying more and more to make sculpture. So like my first iteration. In January, I had a solo exhibition where I finally started printing on metal. Amazing. So this is like my first fold that's like in 3D. And so it actually comes off, or you can even just like sit on the table by itself. Like a freestanding sculpture. And I'm like playing with that even more. So like the next test that I'm doing is like taking this idea a step further. Like they're all like steps that lead from one to the next. Yeah, so it's like, what could it be like if I had taken pieces out and like created these flags? So like thinking of it from the front and thinking of it from the back. And then I'm like, okay, the form is interesting. Now I have to see how it interplays with the image. So that's where I'm like going to hopefully like freestanding sculpture photographs that you can walk all the way around. Yeah. And the experience, like even just looking at this, the experience of like moving past it is very different than looking at a flat photograph, right? You get much more information just from it moving. Yeah, and like you have to actually move your body to kind of like, because like when all of that, when I installed it, I think you have to see, I saw it, so you have to come in on an angle, so all you see is this. Yeah. And then when you walk around, it like reveals the color, and then like, it's a slightly disorienting kind of experience. That's exactly what I'm getting at. Yeah.